So this lecture is going to cover thesis statements. Your thesis is the main point or the main argument of your entire essay. So as we go through each one of these statements, I want you to pause the video and think, is this an effective thesis statement before you continue watching the entire video? I do really want you to do that because I want you to critically think about what a thesis statement is and if you can kind of pick out effective versus not effective thesis statements. So the first sentence we have is, I will be writing about social media. So go ahead and pause the video and think, is this an effective thesis? So the answer is no, it is not, because here you are announcing what you will be doing in your essay rather than actually writing, rather than actually stating what your argument is. Next we have the effects of social media. Is this an effective thesis? No, it's not. The reason is that it's incomplete. It's an incomplete sentence. This is more of like a title for an essay rather than an argument. Next, we have social media has many positive and negative effects. So this kind of sounds like it could work. However, it's an empty sentence. So it's very, very difficult to find something in this world that doesn't have a positive or a negative effect for at least one person. So when you say social media has many positive and negative effects, yes, so does everything else in life. So you're kind of writing an empty sentence here because you're not really saying anything. Next we have social media is bad. Does this sound like a good thesis? Kind of, however, you have a lot of vague words in this sentence. So we have social media, and social media can refer to like Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, etc. It can also refer to LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a social media platform, and it's where professionals go to network. People get hired. You basically posting your professional profile on LinkedIn, and you can connect with other professionals in your field. So that sounds very different from something like Twitter. So when you're saying social media, it's too much of a blanket statement there, so it's a little too vague. Also, the word bad is very vague there. What do we mean by bad? Do we mean it has like a negative academic effect? It can hamper your social skills. What does bad really mean? Bad can also mean good in certain contexts, like even though it's slang, if you say something like, oh, that's a bad car, meaning it's a good car, then bad there has a very different meaning from something negative. So the word bad is too vague. Next we have, does Facebook cause depression in teenagers? That's a pretty interesting question. However, that's the problem, is that it's a question. So remember, your thesis statement has to say what your position is or your argument is in this essay. But if you're asking a question, then your reader does not know what your position is. If you answer that question, then that'll definitely be an interesting thesis statement. However, at this stage, it's just a question. Next we have, I really like using Facebook. So what do you think? Is this a good thesis? No, it's not. It's a little too opinionated. You won't really find evidence to support something like this. So you definitely want to have a thesis statement where you can find evidence to support. Next we have, some people believe that Facebook is a more effective marketing tool than other popular social media platforms such as Instagram and Twitter. So that's a pretty lengthy statement. It sounds very specific, like they're making a valid point. However, the problem is that they're not stating what their argument is. So they started out by saying some people believe this, and that's fine, but what do you believe? What is your argument for your paper? Next we have 2.2 billion accounts on Facebook are fake. So the problem with this is that it's too factual. There's nothing that can be argued here. There's nowhere to go with this. You don't have anything left to be developed. It is what it is. So you don't want to state something that's a fact as a thesis. This you can use as evidence in your essay, definitely, but it doesn't work as a thesis statement. Next we have, Facebook is the worst invention of mankind, and banning it should solve all of humanity's ills. That's pretty intense. You're definitely stating a position there, but the problem is that it's way too dramatic. If someone reads this, they'll be like, okay, calm down. Facebook is definitely not the worst invention of mankind. It definitely would not solve all of humanity's ills if it were banned. And next we have the functionality, networking options, and user support surfaces make Facebook a better tool for classroom use than Twitter. So this one works. That's a pretty good thesis. It's specific. It's comparing two things, so it's not too broad. It's not too narrow, and we can definitely see how this paper would take shape. So what makes an effective thesis? When you're thinking about this question, you want your thesis to ideally appear at the end of your introduction paragraph, and it should be roughly 1 to 3 sentences. If you have a longer paper, then you can have a longer thesis, but if you're going beyond 3 sentences, it might be a little too lengthy. For a short, like 3 to 5 page paper, 1, maybe 2 sentences if you're pushing it would work, but 3 sentences might be a little too long for a thesis for such a short paper. Your thesis should be subjective, which means it should be your interpretation or your opinion, and it should be objective, which means it should be factual. So, what the way that you can think about it is, it should be your opinion that you can then support with evidence. So a lot of the times when we're writing essays, we feel a little hesitant to put our opinions in there. We feel like it should be kind of a report of factual information, but you want your opinion to be in there. You want, it's your argument, so that's why you're writing, is to present your argument, which is your opinion. The difference between just having an opinion and having a thesis is it's an opinion that you can then find evidence to support. Your thesis should also be interesting. So obviously this is very subjective. What's interesting to one person might not be interesting to someone else. But you can have a general idea of when something might not be interesting. For example, if you're arguing that war is bad, then yeah, it is. I think it would be very difficult to find someone who would come out and say no, war is good, right? And or they might be like, what are you talking about? Of course war is good. So saying war is bad, that's a very obvious thing. So it would not be interesting for someone to read that. But if you're saying that war is beneficial, then someone might say, what? So then that's a lot more interesting. It'll make people want to read your essay because you're presenting a different type of argument. Your thesis should give your essay focus. Everything in your essay should support your thesis in some way. This is really essential for you to make sure that your writing is concise and you're not wasting essay space. So one thing that you might find very helpful is when you're done writing your essay, go through it and read your essay body paragraph by body paragraph and make sure, first of all, make sure that all of the points you're mentioning in your body paragraph relate to your topic sentence, and then make sure that everything that you're mentioning relates to your thesis. If it doesn't relate to your thesis, then it doesn't belong in your paper, and it can be very difficult for us to cut information out, especially when we dedicate a lot of time to writing this information. But it actually can strengthen your essay a lot if you just remove any unnecessary or extra information. Your thesis should also avoid weak words or phrases like I think or I believe. For example, let's look at these 2 sentences. We have, I think Facebook should have stricter privacy policies in order to protect vulnerable populations, versus Facebook should have stricter privacy policies in order to protect vulnerable populations. So the second sentence is a lot stronger than the first one. When you have words like I think or I believe, it makes it sound like you're not very confident as a writer. Like you're saying, oh, okay, I know people might disagree with me, but this is just kind of my opinion. So you don't want to do that. You want to assert yourself as a writer. If you are writing your thesis statement, we know that that's your argument. So you don't need to say I think or I believe, because we know you think and you believe it. Removing those words will definitely help to strengthen your argument. Okay, so now let's talk about some steps to writing an effective thesis. So the first thing you want to do is choose a topic if one hasn't been assigned to you. Um, if you have the option to choose a topic, you should definitely choose something that you're interested in, not something that sounds like it'll be impressive. So the reason for that is you want to enjoy writing your paper. You don't want to choose a topic and as you're writing your essay you're like, oh man, this feels like such a chore, it's so much work. If you are interested in learning more about a topic, then it'll make the writing process so much more easy for you. If you have been assigned a topic, try to choose an angle that you can take that would be interesting for you. Next, you want to brainstorm ideas, and you can use brainstorming techniques like concept mapping, listing, free writing, questioning, etc. I have a separate video where I explore brainstorming techniques. Next, you want to narrow your focus and choose an angle. So if we were assigned a topic of social media, you might choose the angle of Facebook and relationships. Then you want to create a thesis question. So you might ask the question, does Facebook negatively or positively affect romantic relationships? Now, it's important to remember that you should not stop here. You have to go on and then answer the question. And when you answer that question, that will be your thesis statement. So your thesis, as I mentioned before, it should be 1 to 2 sentences. And you definitely want to ensure that you're avoiding the errors that we talked about in the previous slide. So our answer to that question might be, Facebook puts a strain on romantic relationships as couples tend to become addicted to presenting an image of perfection rather than living authentically in their relationships. So a few tips to keep in mind. Your thesis is a work in progress. So it's okay for you to have like a general idea but not perfected from the beginning. And then as you're writing your essay, you just come back to your thesis frequently and make sure that the ideas that you're mentioning still fall under the umbrella of your thesis. And if it doesn't connect to the point that you raised in your thesis, then you can tweak your thesis or you can remove the ideas. But it's fine for you to just keep working on that thesis as you're writing your essay. Your thesis might even be the very last thing that you create when you're writing your essay. So you might have a pretty good idea of the argument that you want to make and how you want to make that argument. You might start writing your essay and you have like a brilliant conclusion and you just need to get it out of you. So you write your conclusion and then you kind of work backwards where you have your body paragraphs. And then at the end you create your thesis statement based on the argument that you made in your essay. And that's perfectly fine. Writing doesn't have to be a linear process. So it's okay for you to start with your conclusion and then just write whatever is making you happy to write in that moment. The point is that after you're done writing, you go through it and you make sure everything is organized and it makes sense. But just get those ideas out of you. So it's okay for you to write your entire essay and then come back and create that thesis statement. Your thesis should also avoid blanket statements like all, none, and every. So if you're using these words, it kind of invalidates whatever point you're making. Like if you said all people feel this way or like every person should be required to do this thing, automatically people will raise objections to it and it just makes your thesis very weak. Your thesis should be clear and concise. Avoid confusing the reader. If you don't know what your argument is, you'll have a very difficult time creating a clear statement. And if you're confused about about the argument that you're making, then you're going to confuse your reader. So definitely have a clear idea of the point that you want to make and of how your arguments support that thesis statement, just to make sure that you're not confusing your reader. And as I mentioned before, you want to compare each paragraph of your completed essay to your thesis statement to ensure that everything that you're mentioning in that essay is relevant to the thesis. And those are the tips that I have for creating an effective thesis.